On May 22, 1963, two Americans step onto the summit of Everest at 6:15 in the evening, by a route that didn't exist. They spend the night at 8,500 meters, with no tent and no oxygen. Willi Unsoeld loses 9 toes, but he comes down alive. 16 years later, he's leading students down a saddle called Cadaver Gap on Mount Rainier, a mountain half the height of Everest. At 10 past 1 in the afternoon, the slope under the first rope team starts to move. For 20 years, he taught that risk is a teaching tool, and where the line runs between a lesson and a risk, that he had to work out on himself. And not only on himself. Willi Unsoeld is born on October 5, 1926, in Arcata, a small town on the northern California coast, right by the ocean. On paper, he's William Francis Unsoeld, but that name never really takes. His whole life, he's Willi. His childhood and his youth happen in Oregon, in Eugene. About his parents, about brothers and sisters, there's almost nothing reliable. Everything we know about him starts with the mountains. Eugene sits in a wide valley, and to the east, that valley is walled off by the Cascades. For a boy from a town like that, this isn't scenery, it's a weekend schedule. Unsoeld starts going up there as a teenager. The Cascades aren't a gym to him, and they aren't an arena, more like a second home. Leave on Friday, come back Sunday. After school, he enrolls at Oregon State College and picks physics. From the outside, it's the ordinary track of a capable student in the post-war years. Hard science, a clear future. But the mountains don't get pushed aside by his studies. They run alongside them. He gets out into the Cascades at every opportunity and gradually collects people like himself around him. Out of those trips grows a student mountain club, and Unsoeld is one of its founders. For the college, it's small news. For him, it's the first time he's leading other people into the mountains instead of just going himself. He won't get his physics degree until 1951, though by the calendar, he should have finished earlier. His studies get interrupted, and it has nothing to do with illness or money or the army. In the summer of 1949, the 22-year-old student decides to travel around the world, hitchhiking with a backpack and a small amount of cash in his pocket. No exchange semester, no expedition with a timetable. By this point, his entire mountain experience is the Cascades. No Alps, no Himalaya, not one serious climb behind him. Within a few months, he'll have been to both the Alps and the Himalaya. He has about $300. In 1949, that won't buy you a round-the-world ticket, but it will keep you alive for a year if you sleep wherever you can and ride with whoever will take you. He comes back with roughly $250. On paper, that means he spent about $50 in a year. That says more about the way he traveled than any description could. The route takes him through Europe, and in the Alps, he does something a man whose experience is only the Cascades usually wouldn't attempt. He climbs the Matterhorn alone. That mountain has had its reputation since the previous century. A clean pyramid visible from the valley on every side, a long ridge, and ugly statistics. Unsoeld climbs it, then further east. He makes it to India, to the Garhwal Himalaya. The objective is Nilkantha, 6,596 meters, almost 2 kilometers higher than Mont Blanc. 2 others join him, Laurie French and Herbert Rickard. None of the 3 has Himalayan experience or expedition support, just young men who came to look at a big mountain up close and decided to give it a try. They get to roughly 5,500 meters. Above that begins the thing you can't prepare for at home. Air half as thick as what you're used to. Weather that changes within an hour, and a full vertical kilometer still to go. A kilometer built nothing like anything they've climbed before. They don't go higher. As a result, it's a failure. But Unsoeld sees Himalayan scale from the inside for the first time instead of in a photograph. How much time the approach eats, how much strength the altitude takes, how small a person looks on a slope like that. He comes back to Oregon thinking the Cascades were only preparation. To get back to the Himalaya, he needs money, time, and a job that gives him both. That takes the next several years. From about 1950, Unsoeld works as a smoke jumper, a parachute firefighter with the United States Forest Service. The base is in Cave Junction in southern Oregon. The setup is simple and harsh. A fire starts in backcountry timber no vehicle can reach, so they drop men in from the air. Jump, land among the trees, several days with a shovel and a saw on the fire line, then walk out to the nearest road. For a man just back from the Himalaya, it's the right school. They pay him for exactly what the mountains teach, working tired in awkward places where help won't come soon, and they pay enough that a season covers his schooling. Physics, meanwhile, stops holding him. Something else takes over, something a laboratory can't settle. Why a person voluntarily goes where it's hard and dangerous. In 1954, he earns a second degree in the humanities. In these same years, he marries. Jolene will stay with him to the end and, much later, write a book about their life together. In 1954, a daughter is born. They choose an unusual name. The girl is called Nanda Devi, after a summit in the Indian Himalaya, one of the hardest mountains in the world to reach. Unsoeld himself hasn't been on it yet. He'd seen it from a distance, knew it from descriptions, and that was enough to give the name to his own child. 22 years later, the family legend will turn out differently. For now, that same year, 1954, brings another piece of news. He's invited on an expedition, and this time, not a scouting trip with 2 chance companions, but a full team. The objective is an 8,000er. It's called the California Himalayan Expedition, and William Seary is in charge. The roster is serious. Alan Steck, one of the strongest American rock climbers of the day, plus Long, Meyer, and Dunmeyer. Unsoeld joins at 27, with 1 failed attempt to his name. After Nilkantha, this is a different league. Makalu, 8,485 meters, the 5th highest 8,000er on the planet, and at that point, unclimbed by anyone. The mountain stands 20 kilometers from Everest, and from some angles looks more imposing than its neighbor. A sharp 4-sided pyramid with no easy side at all. The Americans choose the southeast ridge. They work siege style, the only style used at that altitude in those years. It doesn't look much like climbing in the usual sense. The team sets base camp, then the first intermediate camp, hauls loads up to it, comes down, goes up again, sets the second, and so on, week after week. The chain of camps grows upward like scaffolding. At the end, a small summit party will move up it. But to push those few to the top, everybody works. The weather breaks the schedule. The storms come in long. Not a couple of days you can sit out in a tent, but weeks of wind and snowfall. Fixed ropes get buried, the trail disappears, every carry has to be done over. Siege style works against itself here. The longer the chain of camps, the more strength goes into keeping it alive. They can't get above 7,100 meters. Nearly 1.5 kilometers still separates them from the summit. The expedition packs up with nothing. A year later, the French come to Makalu and climb it on the first try. For the Americans, the result stings. They scouted it, took the beating, and someone else took the summit. Unsoeld goes home without a summit for the 2nd time running, and something simple gets through to him. Endurance and stubbornness aren't enough at that altitude. He needs to know how to move like a professional. He'll get paid to learn it. After Makalu, Unsoeld moves to Wyoming, to the Teton Range, and hires on as a mountain guide with Exum Mountain Guides, one of the oldest outfits in the country. The Tetons are perfect for it. Sharp granite peaks rise straight out of flat plain, no foothills, and the route starts on rock immediately. Guiding means dozens of climbs a season with people who are seeing a rope for the first time. Unsoeld goes up the same walls hundreds of times and knows every hold on them, and along the way, he learns something you can't learn on your own climbs. Reading another person's condition, knowing when a client is already at his limit and still saying he's fine. According to one biography, he wakes his clients up by playing the harmonica, a small detail, but it captures the man exactly. He has another job in the Tetons. Together with Paul Pietzold and Bill Bird, he helps create the rescue service of Grand Teton National Park. Before that, injured people were hauled out however possible, by whoever happened to be nearby. Now there are people trained for it who go out when they're called. His clients probably have no idea about his other life. Unsoeld finishes his doctoral work at the University of Washington, and in 1958 defends a dissertation on the French philosopher Henri Bergson. The subject is the link between inner experience, morality, and freedom. How what a person lives through turns into his sense of what he owes and what he chooses. Put simply, he's explaining in academic language what he does with his hands on rock every summer. In 1960, he publishes an essay in a climbing journal about the life of a Teton guide. He's writing from inside the profession now. By this point, he's responsible for other people's lives every day, and he's paid for it. And in that same year, 1960, an invitation arrives to go back where he'd already lost twice, the big mountains of Asia. The invitation isn't to the Himalaya, though, but to the Karakoram, the range further north, on the border of Pakistan and China. The expedition is American-Pakistani, led by Nick Clinch, an experienced organizer who doesn't like noise. The objective is Masherbrum, 7,821 meters. Nobody had gotten up it. Several parties had tried, and every time they had turned back. There are no easy lines on Masherbrum at all, steep ice and rock faces on every side, and any option means serious ground from day one. The Karakoram is harsher than Nepal on top of that, drier, windier, and noticeably colder at the same altitudes. The team picks the southeast side and works siege style again. But this time, the weather gives them a window. On July 6th, Unsoeld and George Bell go up and become the first people in history to stand on Masherbrum. 2 days later, on July 8th, a second pair follows, Clinch himself and his Pakistani partner, Akhtar. The first ascent is done, and done cleanly. Nobody died, nobody had to be rescued. There's one detail of this climb the sources hold on to loosely. In one version, a blizzard catches the team on the descent, and Unsoeld signals with his harmonica, the same one he used to wake his clients in the Tetons. In falling snow, the sound carries further than a voice, and the rope teams navigate by it. There's nothing to confirm it, but the story keeps traveling from text to text. For 33-year-old Unsoeld, Masherbrum is the turning point, his first real summit, and immediately one of the most visible American achievements of those years. From now on, he's invited on serious expeditions not for company, but because he's needed. 2 years later, he'll leave America for a long stretch, and not on an expedition. In 1962, Unsoeld takes a break from academic work and goes to Nepal to be an administrator. The Peace Corps, the American Volunteer Program, first deputy, then director of the Nepal program. Later, he moves to the International Development Agency. Reviewers will write afterward that this wasn't his best period. As an administrator, he was mediocre, but he's living in Nepal and he knows the country from the inside. In 1963, the American Everest expedition comes together under Norman Dyrenforth. It's a national project. The main sponsor is the National Geographic Society. The press is watching the preparations, and the team is expected to deliver. No American has been on Everest, and the task is stated plainly: bring home the summit. And that's where the argument starts. Unsoeld and Tom Hornbein, a doctor and a climber, propose the West Ridge, a long line through unscouted terrain that nobody has climbed on Everest. Whether it goes at all, nobody can say in advance. Dyrenforth bets on the classic route by way of the South Col, a known path climbed by the British and the Swiss with understandable odds. You can see the leader's side. The sponsors are paying for an American on the summit, not for a beautiful experiment that ends in nothing. You can see Hornbein and Unsoeld's side too. Repeating somebody else's route 10 years after the first ascent means going to Everest for somebody else's glory. The team splits into two factions. Dyrenforth calls Hornbein a fanatic. Unsoeld himself will say later that one of his functions on that expedition was keeping Hornbein under control. It's said with irony, but it's also an acknowledgement. His partner was an extremely stubborn man. The 1st of May decides everything. Jim Whittaker and the Sherpa Nawang Gombu reach the summit by the classic route. There's an American on Everest now, and the expedition's main task is done. And the West Ridge people have their hands free. Nothing they do from here on goes into the sponsor's report. They set the high camp on the West Ridge at around 8,300 meters, on a bare, wind-scoured slope where the tent has to be anchored with anything at hand. From here, on May 22nd, they start up. 2 rope teams go for the mountain that day, from opposite sides. Barry Bishop and Lute Yerstad climb the classic route by the South Col and reach the top around 3:30 in the afternoon. Everything goes to plan for them. Hornbein and Unsoeld take a different way. High on the West Ridge, they enter a narrow rock couloir, a steep gully squeezed between walls, with no ledge to rest on and no room to pass. That couloir will later carry Hornbein's name, and to this day, it remains one of the most serious pieces of ground on Everest. They move up it slowly, rock under snow, little oxygen, every movement costing several breaths. They reach the summit at 6:15 in the evening, 12 hours after they started. For Everest, that's monstrously late. At that hour, a normal rope team should have been back down in camp long ago. They're the 11th and 12th people in history to stand on the highest point on the planet, and the first to arrive from that side. They can't go back down the way they came. Getting into that couloir at the end of their strength and at sunset is certain death. That leaves going down the other side of the mountain by the southeast ridge, the very classic route they had argued so hard against. That's where they go. And that's how the first traverse of an 8,000er in history happens. Up one side, down the other. Nobody had ever gone straight through a mountain like that before them. The light goes fast. Somewhere lower on the ridge, Bishop and Gerstad are coming down, also later than planned. By the time all four finally meet on the slope, it's dark, and none of them knows where the tent is. Going on in the dark along an unfamiliar ridge is pointless. They'd fall before they found anything. They stay where they are. The altitude is around 8,500 meters. Sources disagree. Some say 8,530, others 8,595. They have no tent, no sleeping bags, no stove. The oxygen has run out by now. There's only the clothing they've walked in all day and a snow slope under their feet. A night at that altitude means -30 and colder. Wind that pulls the heat out of you faster than any frost. An air with a third of the oxygen you're used to. In those conditions, the body stops warming itself, and it hits the hands and the feet hardest. They sit down on the slope and wait for morning. It's the highest bivouac in the history of climbing at that point, and nobody knows how such a thing even ends. All four live to see dawn. That alone is rare. But the bill for that night gets handed to them lower down, when the doctors assess the frostbite. Unsoeld loses 9 toes out of 10. Bishop loses all 10. On May 26th, they're evacuated by helicopter. Ahead of them are months in hospital and several operations. In July, the team is received by President Kennedy, who presents the Hubbard Medal, the highest award of the National Geographic Society. In the photographs of that meeting, Unsoeld stands with the others, and from the picture, you'd never know that this man had recently had half his footing amputated. The fame works out strangely after that. In America, the hero is Whitaker. First American on Everest is a simple line, convenient for a headline. In the world climbing community, the Hornbein and Unsoeld traverse is valued more highly. The National Geographic Society will later include that traverse among the 5 greatest ascents of Everest in all its history. But all of that happens without Unsoeld taking part. At that moment, he's learning to walk. Nobody thinks about their toes while they still have them. They hold your balance in every step. They give the push forward. They keep the foot on a slope. Unsoeld leaves the hospital without 9 of them, and that means the whole mechanics of movement has to be assembled again from scratch. His gait changes, his footing changes, and mountain boots stop being an ordinary object and turn into a problem solved specially for him. The biographies contain no details of the recovery. The result, though, is visible. After 1963, there will be no high-altitude expeditions for him for 13 years. Formally, he's an active climber, and he keeps going to the mountains, but the era of 8,000ers is closed for him. He's 37, with the first ascent of Masherbrum and the Everest traverse behind him, and all of it is already in the past tense. He stays in Nepal until 1967, then returns to the United States and finds another use for his subject. He becomes an instructor and a traveling lecturer for Outward Bound, a program that teaches people through hard field courses. In 1968, he leads the first course of its Northwest School in the North Cascades, in the very mountains where he'd started. This is where his central idea takes shape. Danger, Unsoeld says, can't be subtracted from education. It is the education. A person in a position where everything depends on him alone learns more about himself than in a year in a classroom. What he'd been doing for himself becomes a method for others. In the fall of 1970, he becomes one of the founding faculty of a new college, the Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington. He teaches philosophy and at the same time builds a program of outdoor education. At its base are habitat groups. Students don't visit an environment on a field trip. They live in it and learn in it. One of those groups is the Winter Mountaineering Group. In 1974, he adds an important qualification. The meaning of the mountains is tested not in the mountains, but after you come back to the city. 5 years later, that same winter group will go up Rainier, but first there'll be one more big mountain. The first in 13 years. Unsoeld is 49, and he's invited to a place he'd never climbed, but whose name he'd spoken at home every day. Nanda Devi in India? 7,816 meters. The mountain stands inside a ring of ridges, and you can only get to it through a narrow gorge. Until the middle of the 20th century, it was considered all but unreachable. The expedition is Indian-American, co-led by Unsoeld and Ad Carter. They plan to climb a new route from the northwest side. The team they assemble is strong: John Rosgally, Lou Reichart, Jim States, Marty Hoey, Peter Lev. And in the same lineup, Unsoeld's 22-year-old daughter. Some sources give her age as 23. For the newspapers, it's a ready-made story. The mood inside the team is different. The arguments start immediately. The first one is about style. Rosgally insists on alpine style: fast, a small party, one push. Unsoeld and Lev lean toward the traditional siege, where everyone who can goes up gradually. The argument only looks technical. What's really at stake is what the expedition came for: a summit at any price, or making sure everyone on the team gets to see the mountain. The second argument is about the roster. Who should be going up at all? The participation of women in the team becomes a subject of its own. Rosgally doesn't hide his doubts. On the 1st of September, the question settles itself. Rosgally, Reichart, and States go up and reach the summit of Nanda Devi by the new route. The expedition has what it came for. Unsoeld and his daughter are in the high camps at that time. For them, the climb isn't over. They're planning to follow. Between the 1st and the 7th of September, there's a gap in the record. All that's known is that the weather doesn't let them move quickly, and that above 7,000 meters, a person fades the longer he sits there. What happened inside those 6 days, nobody really wrote down. On the 7th of September, Nanda Devi's condition worsens sharply. What exactly is happening to her? Every source explains in its own way. One version is a blood clotting disorder. At high altitude, the blood thickens, and that can end badly. Another is an abdominal ailment, pain and weakness that altitude multiplies many times over. There's no precise diagnosis in the primary sources. It doesn't get easier by midday or by evening. She's in a tent high on the mountain, her father beside her. Taking her down isn't possible. Below is a difficult section of the route. The weather is unstable, and she can't walk on her own. All they can do is wait. It ends suddenly, just as the group is getting ready to descend, faster than anyone can react. Nanda Devi was gone. The 7th of September, 1976, above 7,000 meters, in a tent beside her father. Some texts date it to the 8th of September. The team can't bring her body down for the same reasons they couldn't bring her down alive. They leave her on Nanda Devi, on the mountain whose name she'd carried all her life. The expedition goes down without her. On paper, it all worked. A new route climbed, the summit taken, reports still to be written. In fact, what comes off the mountain is a team already sorting out who decided what, who could have done otherwise, and why a 22-year-old member was up that high and up there that long in the first place. Unsoeld goes home. Until that day, he had been the one paying for his convictions. They don't give him any quiet. The press picks the story up. Journalists and authors come to the family, call, ask for comment. The Unsoelds are in plain view exactly when they want it least. At the same time, the climbing world takes him apart. It's the second time he's publicly criticized. First Everest, where a late summit push nearly cost 4 men their lives. Now, Nanda Devi. The question is the same one. Isn't his being right costing other people too much? Unsoeld answers directly, without dodging and without softening his wording. He's asked how you cope with a loss like that. He says you can't cope. You don't cope with the loss of a remarkable person. That person copes with you. It sounds like a philosophical thesis, but the meaning is simple. He doesn't consider himself a man who lived through this and closed the book. When he's asked why he keeps going to the mountains after everything, he answers with a question. Do you really want me to die of a heart attack in front of the television, with a beer and a bag of chips in my hands? It isn't bravado. The alternative he's being offered simply doesn't look safer to him. It looks more pointless. He doesn't renounce his philosophy of risk. He doesn't soften a word of what he'd been saying since the 60s, and he takes nothing back. He doesn't shut down the outdoor education program at Evergreen and doesn't hand it over to anyone else. And he keeps taking student groups into the winter mountains himself, not sending them off with instructors, but walking in front, the way he'd walked all his life. To refuse would have meant admitting he'd been teaching nonsense. The next trip like that is set for the end of February, 1979. The mountain is Mount Rainier, the one you can see from Olympia on a clear day. Nothing exotic about it. The volcano, 4,392 meters, stands apart from the other peaks, and therefore collects all the weather off the ocean. In winter, it turns into a full-scale, high-altitude mountain. Wind, snowfall, avalanche conditions that change within a day. That's exactly why the Evergreen Winter Group comes here. Everything Unsoeld intends to teach is right here. The party is Unsoeld himself and 21 students, 22 people in all. The number matters because in the press it will drift. Some publications will say 12 students, and a later review says 29. The original report gives 22. On February 25th, the group starts from Paradise, the main entry point on the mountain, and spends the night near Panorama Point. On February 26th and 27th, a storm sets in, and they wait it out in snow caves, shelters dug into the slope that hold heat better than a tent. On February 28th, they move up across the Muir snowfield and reach Camp Muir, a stone hut at 3,000 meters, the standard base for climbs on Rainier. On the 1st of March, the weather settles, and the group works out the route through Cadaver Gap, the saddle between rock outcrops that leads to the Ingram Glacier. On the 2nd of March, Unsoeld gets on the radio with Ranger Gary Olson. He reports two things. First, he rates the avalanche danger as very low. Second, the route is changing. The climb will go through Cadaver Gap rather than up the rib planned earlier. That same day, all 22 move to a high camp at around 3,600 meters on the glacier by Gibraltar Rock. On the 3rd of March, a morning summit attempt ends almost as soon as it starts. The wind picks up, visibility drops, and the group turns back to camp. By evening, it's clear their margin of time is used up. On the morning of March 4th, there's no choice left. The food is running out. There's almost no fuel to melt snow, and without water at that altitude, the group will be spent within a day. On top of that, strong wind, falling snow, and a forecast promising it will only get worse. Staying at the high camp isn't an option. At 10 in the morning, the descent begins. The reports list 21 people on it, one fewer than went up to the high camp. What accounts for the difference? The documents don't explain. They reach the top of Cadaver Gap, and here Unsoeld makes the decision that will later be picked apart in detail. Instead of going around, straight down to Camp Muir, the short way, across the slope of the gap. In bad weather, with tired and hungry people, that looks logical. The faster you're down, the better. At 12:40, the first rope team steps onto the slope. Unsoeld is leading it. With him are Janie Diepenbrock, 21, Peter Miller, 26, and Frank Kaplan, 20. The first rope team on a descent always breaks trail and tests the ground. Everyone else follows the track that's already made. 17 people wait above, up on the gap. From where they stand, they can see the whole slope at once, 4 figures moving slowly down a white field. At 1:10, the slope under the first rope team releases. It's a slab avalanche, the most dangerous kind there is. A dense layer of snow resting on a weak base doesn't slide off gradually. It breaks away all at once, as a single sheet. The fracture line runs the full width of the gap. The slab is about a meter thick at its center, and the slide runs roughly 150 meters. From above it looks unremarkable, a white field suddenly moving downhill. Between the moment the snow goes and the moment the 4 disappear from sight, only seconds pass. There's no time to shout, let alone to act. The snow stops almost immediately. The sheet slides and settles, compacted into a mass you can't dig with your hands. Unsoeld is buried under about a meter. Janie Diepenbrock under 60 centimeters. Peter Miller has the most luck. At the last moment, he gets a handout, and a visible point stays above the snow. Frank Kaplan is only partly buried. He too stays on the surface. There's nowhere for help to come from. The nearest people, the rangers at Camp Muir, are lower down the slope. Reaching them takes time, and a helicopter won't fly in weather like this. And the clock is running in minutes. Under compacted snow, a person's chances fall away very fast. So, the digging will be done by the people up above. The first down to the slide is Ian Yawles's rope team, then Sean Downey's. These are students who that morning were on a training trip and are now running a rescue on an avalanche slope where a second slab could go. There's one person in the group with medical training, Penna Dempsey, an emergency medical technician. Miller and Kaplan are pulled out alive. They're on the surface, and with them it's settled quickly. With the other two, it goes differently. The snow above them has to be dug out, and the minutes go by. Diepenbrock and Unsoeld are dug out with no signs of life. Dempsey and the others try to bring them back and keep at it a long time, longer than any protocol requires. At 2:45, the attempts stop. By 3 o'clock, the group gathers on the slope. 19 people, half of whom have just been part of a rescue, standing in the middle of bad weather at an altitude where it gets dark early. They have to get themselves down. By 4:30, they reach Camp Muir. Then 6 days of waiting. The storm doesn't leave the mountain, and Unsoeld and Diepenbrock can only be brought down on the 10th of March. In one student's statement, the day of the avalanche is called Monday, though every other document records Sunday, the 4th of March. Discrepancies like that are normal for people who'd spent a week in a storm and lost count of the days. The inquiry starts right away. Evergreen convenes a commission, and not as a formality. It includes Ed LaChapelle, one of America's leading avalanche researchers, D. Molinaire, a climber and an expert on Rainier, and George Senner. They reconstruct the picture fairly precisely. The slab was released by the first rope team. The weight of 4 people was the load that broke the balance of the layer. The snow in the upper part of the gap was holding, and Unsoeld's assessment, passed by radio 2 days earlier, was correct for that section of slope. Lower down, things were different. The likely cause is a wind slab among the rocks. Wind blows snow into sheltered pockets, and there it settles dense. A slab like that holds right up to the first serious load, and from above, you can't see it. The Commission's second conclusion is one that rarely shows up in reports like this. The release under the first rope team turned out to be the lesser evil. Had the slab gone later, when the following groups were out on the slope, far more people would have been caught, including those waiting above. The final wording is this: in the circumstances as they stood, Unsoeld was making reasonable decisions. Beside it, the Commission puts a reservation that makes the document more honest. Many guides, the experts write, would not have gone in there with a group like that. And they add straight away, that's a matter of personal preference, not of whether the climb itself was permissible. Everything genuinely arguable stays open. Whether the descent by that route in that weather was justified. How far a leader answers for the people he takes with him. No lawsuits over this case could be found. Neither could any confirmed changes to the rules for educational mountain trips that followed directly from this story. The story leaves Washington state quickly. The death of a man who'd climbed Everest by an unknown route reaches the national press and the record of March 1979. The college president, Daniel Evans, says Unsoeld embodied the spirit and the appetite for life and for learning. At the time, it sounds like an obituary. The professional community reacts differently. The case is described in detail in the Annual Review of Accidents in North American Mountaineering, and the reason for including it is stated plainly. The accident received wide coverage and will be discussed often. The course wasn't shut down after the avalanche. It goes on working, and that probably is the college's answer to the argument about his method. Since 1986, Evergreen has held a memorial seminar series in his name. The argument about Nanda Devi comes back in 1987. John Roskelley publishes a book sharply critical of the way that expedition was organized. A reviewer in a specialist journal notes that the account is partisan and contains reconstructed dialogue, conversations restored by the author years afterward. The book doesn't settle anything, but it shows how deep that crack inside the team ran. In 2002, a biography of Unsoeld appears. It doesn't begin in Oregon and it doesn't begin on Everest, but with this avalanche, with the 4th of March at Cadaver Gap. The author calls Nanda Devi a change of eras in mountaineering, a shift from a collective ethic to an individual one. That's an interpretation, not a fact. Not much in the Rainier story is verifiable. 22 people who went up the mountain on the 25th of February, the saddle called Cadaver Gap, and the time 1:10. The rest is still retold differently.